What would you do if your parents cursed your newborn baby? You didn't hear me wrong. My parents cursed my baby, who had only been born for 3 days. And what happened after that made them pay a heavy price for the words they said. Why did they do that? And did I protect my child? Before getting into the details of the story, let me say thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for taking the time to follow this story. Hello everyone, I'm Roman, 32 years old, currently living with my wife and son in Portland, Oregon. Portland is where my wife was born and raised. Before, my wife and I lived in Denver. But then, a heartbreaking incident happened when our son had only been born for 3 days. After that painful event, I decided to find another city to live in, and Portland became our choice. The heartbreaking story I'm telling you today happened on August 22, 2022. At that time, Henry had just been born 3 days earlier, and we were still in Denver. That day, around 8 a.m., while my wife's parents, Edwin and Julia, were sitting by the crib playing with Henry, the door to the room opened. The people who walked in were my mom and dad. The moment I saw them, I wanted to walk over and have it out with them right then and there. But Serena grabbed my arm and shook her head, signaling for me to stay calm. She was always like that, always the one holding me back when I was about to lose my cool. I was angry like that because from the time Serena went to the hospital, to when she gave birth to Henry, and the 2 days after that, my mom and dad never called to check on us or came to the hospital to visit their grandson. I had informed them by phone and text before, but all I got back was coldness. Unlike my parents, Serena's parents had flown from Portland to Denver as soon as we told them Serena had gone to the hospital and was waiting to deliver Henry. They came to the hospital just a few hours after Serena was admitted, bringing food, clothes, and everything needed for both mother and baby. The moment Serena gave birth to Henry, Julia cried. She stood beside the bed, holding her daughter's hand tight, tears streaming down her cheeks. And Edwin hugged me and patted my shoulder, congratulating me on becoming a father. I still remember him telling me, "You did great. You're going to be an amazing dad." Those words moved me to tears. That was the kind of thing I'd always hoped to hear from my own father, but never got. And what about my mom and dad? Throughout that entire time, they were nowhere to be found. They didn't call to ask if Serena was okay after giving birth, and they didn't care about Henry at all. They did it on purpose to punish me. They were punishing me for marrying Serena, the woman they considered unworthy of our family. And 3 days after Henry was born, they showed up at the hospital. But not to check on anyone's health, not to hold their grandson. They came to curse my newborn baby. After my parents showed up at the postpartum care room, all of us were shocked. My mother-in-law was the first to speak up. She smiled and said to my parents, "You made it. Come on in. Henry's adorable." Julia was always like that. Even though my parents had mistreated her daughter for years, she still tried to stay polite and gracious. She believed everyone could change, and she always wanted to keep peace in the family. After my mother-in-law's sincere invitation, my mom and dad didn't respond. They quietly walked over to the crib where Henry was lying. The little guy was still sleeping, his tiny lips puckered, his little fingers clenched tight like he was holding on to the whole world. He had no idea his toxic grandparents were about to curse him. When my mom and dad came to the crib and looked at Henry, Edwin stepped closer and said to them, "Look at that, Henry has a nose just like Roman's. When he grows up, he's going to be just as handsome as his dad." Hearing my father-in-law's compliment, I felt a bit smug. I thought to myself, maybe my parents had changed. Maybe when they saw their grandson, their hearts would soften. But I was wrong. My mom and dad still showed no expression other than coldness. They didn't bend down to look at Henry the way other grandparents would. They didn't try to hold his tiny hands either. They didn't say a word about how cute he was, or who in the family he looked like. All they did was stand there, looking at my son with cold eyes like they were looking at some inanimate object. Serena was lying in bed, still weak after giving birth. She looked at my parents with hopeful eyes, hoping they would say something nice about our son. But the prolonged silence made the air in the room suffocating. And then, after a moment, my mom coldly said, "When he grows up, he's going to be a failure just like his father." My mom's words exploded like a bomb in the middle of the room. We were all shocked by what my mom had just said. The air in the room became thick and heavy to the point of suffocation. I saw Serena's eyes widen, not believing what she'd just heard. Then tears started rolling down her cheeks. She turned her face away, trying to hide her pain, but I saw it. I saw my wife's heart break right in front of me. Right then, I stepped up and stood in front of my mom. I looked straight at her face and said through gritted teeth, "What did you just say? Repeat it." Mom was now somewhat trembling with fear, seeing me angry. Maybe she'd never seen me like this. She stammered back, I was telling the truth. You're a failure. I'm right." As soon as Mom finished speaking, my hand grabbed my mother's throat. I screamed, "What did you say? Who's the failure?" My grip was now squeezing my mom's throat so hard she couldn't breathe. She used her hands to grab my hand, hoping I'd loosen my grip. Her eyes bulged, her mouth opened, as she tried to gasp for air. In that moment, I wasn't myself anymore. I was just a father protecting his child. I was just a man standing up against the injustice my family had endured for years. Seeing me like that, Serena screamed from behind, "Roman, stop it." I heard that scream, but I didn't listen to my wife. At that moment, I only knew my mom was cursing my newborn baby, and I needed to protect my child at any cost. The child I'd been waiting for all these months. The child I'd promised to love and protect for life. My dad rushed over and tried to pry my hand away, but he couldn't because my other hand was holding it back. He yelled angrily, "How dare you hit your mother? I'll tell the relatives you hit your mother." As soon as he finished speaking, I turned to look at him and said through gritted teeth, "Make sure to tell them your wife cursed my newborn baby." My dad went silent after my response. He kept trying to pry my hand away, but it was useless. I was half a head taller than him and much stronger. Seeing the situation getting harder to control, my father-in-law stepped forward. He put his hand on my shoulder and said calmly but with authority, "Roman, let go. Listen to me. Violence isn't the way to solve this." After Edwin finished speaking, I looked into his eyes. In those eyes, I saw understanding, empathy, and concern for me. He wasn't judging me. He wasn't blaming me. He just wanted me to calm down. Looking into Edwin's sincere eyes, I slowly loosened my grip. Finally, I took my hand off my mom's throat. My mom was now gasping for breath, coughing violently. She stepped back a few steps, hands holding her throat. Maybe that was the first time in her life she'd been in this situation. After everything that had happened, I knew for sure our relationship, already tense for years, would be hard to repair. I thought that, after my decisive action, everything would stop. But no, my mother-in-law, Julia's unexpected action would make the situation even more tense. After I let go, Julia stepped up and stood in front of my mom. As soon as my mom saw Julia approaching, she screamed shrilly, "What do you want?" The scream had barely ended when Julia's hand left 5 finger marks on my mom's face. The slap rang out crisp and clear, echoing in the small room. All of us were shocked by that unexpected action. Edwin immediately rushed over and grabbed Julia, preventing my mother-in-law from hitting my mom again. He pulled her back, whispering, "Julia, calm down, calm down." As for my dad, he stepped over to my mom, reaching out to touch her face to check the injury and comfort her. My mom's cheek was bright red, clearly showing Julia's 5 finger marks. My mom now screamed with a voice full of indignation, "You saw her hit me, and you stay silent?" After that statement, she pointed at my dad's face, her voice shaking with anger. She continued screaming, "You're a man, but you let your wife get hit like that? Are you still my husband?" After my mom's words, my dad stepped forward. He stood looking at Edwin and Julia, then looked back at my mom. Finally, he sighed and shook his head helplessly. I guess after seeing that Edwin was bigger and more muscular than him, he backed down. At that moment, Julia looked straight into my mom's eyes and said in an ice-cold voice, "That slap was a warning. If you dare curse Henry one more time, I'll put you 6 feet under." My mother-in-law wasn't joking. I knew she meant it. In her eyes at that moment was a determination I'd never seen before. Julia was gentle, but when someone touched her family, she became a mother tiger, protecting her cubs. Our commotion had woken Henry up. The little guy was startled and cried out, his crying tearing through the tense space in the room. My wife immediately went to the crib, picked him up, and gently patted him. She whispered soft words in his ear while tears still streamed down her cheeks. Looking at Serena, my heart ached as if it were being cut. She'd just gone through a difficult birth. Her body hadn't recovered yet, and now she had to witness this scene. She didn't deserve to endure these things. Feeling his mother's love, Henry stopped crying right after that, his eyes wide open, looking at my wife. The little guy seemed to sense that his mom was sad, so he lay quietly in her arms. Seeing that scene, my heart felt like someone was squeezing it. My son was only 3 days old and already had to witness this conflict. The pain and anger in me mixed, creating an indescribable mass of emotions. After making sure everything was okay, I decided to clear everything up, even if it meant losing my relationship with my family forever. I turned to face my parents, my eyes now cold as steel. I asked my mom straight to her face, "Why did you call me a failure? What did I do wrong?" My mom rubbed her throat, still sore from my grip. She looked at me with contemptuous eyes and answered, "You're a failure because you married the daughter of a farming family. I tried to stop this marriage, but you wouldn't listen. You chose that family instead of listening to me." Hearing that, I felt my heart shatter. Because Serena's family farmed, my parents had looked down on her for years. My father-in-law, Edwin, couldn't stay silent anymore. He stepped forward and said with a voice full of pride, "Farming family, I'm proud of my profession. We produce food that feeds millions of people. I've worked hard for 40 years to build our farm from 20 acres to nearly 200 acres. I've raised 2 children to adulthood, and now they're both successful in life. And you, what have you accomplished besides looking down on others?" Hearing my father-in-law's words, my mom laughed mockingly and replied, "Farmers are still farmers. No matter how rich you get, you can't change your ordinary roots." After hearing that, Julia couldn't control herself anymore. She wanted to charge at my parents and have it out with them, but luckily, Edwin stopped her in time. He gripped his wife's hand tightly and shook his head, signaling for her to calm down. My dad now also spoke up, his voice full of arrogance, "Son, you should know what social class our family belongs to. Marrying a poor farmer's daughter, you've disgraced the whole family line." That statement was the last straw. I stepped closer to my dad and asked in an ice-cold voice, "My wife's parents, they've given us a farm of nearly 150 acres worth close to $5 million. Currently, the farm operations are also run by them. And you and Mom, what have you given me? Or do you only know how to take from me?" My mom and dad were shocked. They stood there, mouths open, not believing what I just said. My mom stammered, You're lying. That's not possible." I replied coldly, "I don't need you and Dad to believe it. From now on, never show your faces to us again. I will never accept any apology from you and Mom." My mom was now so angry that her face turned red. She pointed straight at my face and said, "I'll cross your name out of the will. You won't get a cent from our assets." Hearing my mom say that, sadness suddenly rose in my heart. Not because of the money, but because I realized my mom was willing to use money as a weapon to control me. A few seconds later, I replied without a tremor in my voice, "Get out of here. I won't let Mom have the right to curse my son for that inheritance." My dad stepped forward now, his eyes flashing with threat. He said to me, "You'll regret this." I laughed sarcastically and replied, "I don't know if I'll regret it or not, but you'll be the one regretting it first. 30 days. I'm giving you 30 days to pay back the $25,000 I lent you in 2018. As soon as I finished speaking, Mom jumped in. She said to me, her voice full of denial, "We don't owe you anything." I slowly replied, "Then let the court handle this matter. I have documents, text messages, and evidence of bank transfers. Now get out before I lose my mind." My dad wanted to say something more, but my father-in-law took action. Edwin clasped his hands together, stretched his shoulders slightly, then rolled his neck like he was warming up to step into a boxing ring. Seeing Edwin's intimidating display, my dad didn't want to stick around anymore. He quickly grabbed my mom's hand and dragged her away. Before leaving, my mom turned back to look at me with eyes full of hatred. Those eyes seemed to say she would never forgive me. After they left, the room fell into silence. I looked at Edwin, looked at Julia, then looked at my wife holding Henry in her arms. I slowly said to them, I'm sorry for what my parents said today. Hearing my words, Julia smiled and said to me, No, you're not at fault. You did really well. Edwin now also stepped forward, patted my shoulder, and said, Good job. You protected your wife and child. However, I don't support you using violence either. As soon as Edwin finished speaking, Julia jumped in immediately. She said, I support Roman. To make someone shut up, the best way is to use your fists. Edwin quickly replied, exasperated, Julia, we shouldn't teach the kids to use violence. Julia replied, hands on her hips, what's the point of being tall and strong like you? If I were you, those two would have been in the hospital for a month getting their jaws reset. Edwin now shook his head in exasperation, while my wife and I, holding Henry, watched the old couple's argument intently. Despite the tense situation, I couldn't help but smile a little as I watched them argue. While the atmosphere was tense between my in-laws, a shocking sound rang out. It was Henry farting. That sound broke the tense atmosphere. All of us burst out laughing. That was the first laughter of the day, and it was like a cool breeze blowing through the suffocating room. Right after that, Julia stepped forward and took Henry from my wife's arms. She looked at Henry, whispering lovingly, my precious grandson. Even your farts are adorable. Edwin then also came beside his wife, looking at Henry intently. He touched his big finger gently to the little guy's cheek, his eyes full of affection. He whispered, this little one's going to do big things someday. I can see it in his eyes. Seeing my in-laws' love for Henry, I felt a bit sad thinking about how my parents treated my son. They should have looked at Henry with loving eyes like that. They should have held Henry in their arms and said how adorable he was. But instead, they cursed him. After everything, I felt somewhat lucky that I still had my in-laws beside us. They were my real family. 3 days later, my wife and Henry were able to come home, and that was also when the storm hit our house once again. Around 7 p.m., my parents and my older brother Matthew showed up at my front door. Matthew was 4 years older than me and was always the most spoiled child in our parents' eyes. I didn't invite them into the house. I closed the door behind me, then stood confronting them on the front porch. I knew what they'd come for. Earlier, I'd asked Jordan, a lawyer friend of mine, to send a notice demanding the $25,000 they owed me. Matthew was the first to speak. He looked at me with an annoyed expression and said, Roman, drop this act. You can't demand that money back from Mom and Dad. I looked at him and asked, why not? That's money I lent them, with proper documentation. Hearing my response, Matthew sighed and said, in a tone as if he were explaining something to a child, I gave that money to Mom and Dad as a gift and you should do the same. I laughed mockingly and replied, you gave money to Mom and Dad? What do you have to give? Or are you using your wife's money to give? Matthew went silent. I knew I'd hit his weak spot. He married Lisa, the daughter of a wealthy local family, and since then had been living off his wife's family. He worked at his father-in-law's company, drove cars his father-in-law bought, and lived in a house his father-in-law purchased. What did he have that was truly his own? After a moment, I continued, you know why Mom and Dad treat your wife differently from mine? Just because your wife is from a rich family while my wife, according to them, is from a poor farming family. They worship Lisa but look down on Serena. Do you think that's fair? Matthew remained silent, not knowing what to say. He knew I was right, but he didn't dare to admit it. My mom now jumped in, her voice full of anger. Serena deserves to be treated that way. She's from a farming family, doesn't know how to behave. I looked straight into my mom's eyes and said, do you remember, Mom? You cursed my newborn son. You said he'd be a failure. Do you think I'll forgive that? My mom turned away, didn't answer. She didn't deny what she'd said or apologize. She just stayed silent, as if what she'd done was entirely right. My dad now spoke up, that was your mom speaking wrong. But you can't cut ties with family over one comment. I replied, one comment? Do you think that was just one comment? Mom cursed my 3-day-old baby. That wasn't just a comment. That wasn't very good. And don't forget, Mom threatened to cross my name out of the inheritance will. So I don't have anything left to lose. Matthew now tried to make peace, his voice sounding pleading, Roman, let it go. Mom and Dad are old. They say stupid things when they're angry. You're their son, you should understand them. I looked at Matthew and shook my head. asking back, "You want me to let it go? Well, could you let it go if someone cursed your child?" Matthew couldn't answer. He stood there, his mouth moving but unable to say a word. I continued, "You people need to leave. I don't want to talk anymore. I'll call the police." Right after that, they left. I just stood there, watching them get in their car and drive away. Their car gradually disappeared into the darkness, and I felt like a part of my life was also vanishing with it. After they left, I went back inside. My in-laws were sitting in the living room. They'd heard the entire conversation. Serena was sitting on the sofa, holding Henry, her eyes red. Julia stood up, walked over, and hugged me. She said warmly, "You did the right thing. Don't let them bully you." Edwin also nodded in agreement, "You're brave. Protecting your family is the most important thing. I'm proud of you." Serena put Henry in his crib, then came to me. She hugged me and whispered, "I'm sorry for all of this. If it wasn't for me," I cut her off, "Don't say that. It's not your fault. The fault is with them, not you." I held her tight, feeling the warmth from her body. In that moment, I knew that no matter what happened, I still had her by my side, and that was enough. That night, couldn't sleep. I stayed up until almost 3 a.m., sitting in my office, staring at my laptop screen. I was hesitating whether or not to post the video recording of my mom coming and cursing my son. The special postpartum care room where my wife and son were staying had surveillance cameras so doctors could intervene if any unexpected situations occurred. The camera was placed in the corner of the room, recording the entire space. Through a friend who worked at the hospital, I obtained the video footage from my parents' visit. The video was about 15 minutes long, recording everything that happened in that room, from when they walked in, to when my mom cursed Henry, to when I grabbed my mom's throat, to when Julia slapped my mom. I'd watched that video countless times. Every time I heard the words, "When he grows up, he's going to be a failure just like his father," coming from my mom's mouth, my heart ached. Those words were like a wound that never healed, bleeding every time it was touched. After careful thought, I decided to post that video on social media. For the video title, I wrote, "What would you do if your mother cursed your 3-day-old baby?" After posting, I shut down my computer and went to sleep after a long, exhausting day with too many things that had happened. My head was spinning, but deep down, I felt I'd done the right thing. The next morning, around 9 a.m., my phone rang nonstop. Calls were coming from my parents and Matthew. I went into my contacts and blocked them because I didn't want to be bothered anymore. I had nothing left to say to them. At the same time, I noticed the notifications. My Facebook was alerting me that my post was receiving massive engagement. I quickly clicked to check. Over 3,000 angry reactions and over 500 comments. Many relatives and friends had watched and left comments. The video had been shared hundreds of times, spreading like wildfire. Some neighbors lived near my parents' house. They'd shared the video and spread the story throughout the community. Some people even tagged my parents' names in the post so that they couldn't hide from it. I read through some comments, and each one made me feel like I wasn't alone in this. A high school friend of mine wrote, "I can't believe what I just watched. Cursing a newborn baby? That's the cruelest thing I've ever heard. Roman, I support you." A distant relative wrote, "I always thought my sister was a good person. Turns out I was wrong. Sorry, Roman, I didn't know you had to endure these things. I always wondered why you rarely visited family. Now I understand." A neighbor of my parents commented, "I've lived next to them for 20 years. They always seemed like decent, good people. Never thought they could do this to their own grandson. Truly shameful." Another comment from someone I didn't know wrote, "This is why many people cut ties with family. Not because they're ungrateful, but because family is too toxic. We don't have an obligation to endure abuse just because they gave birth to us." I read through comment after comment. Some people supported me, some criticized my parents, and some shared similar stories of their own. But what surprised me most was that no one defended my parents. Not a single person. The following days were tense for my mom and dad. They'd become famous throughout their neighborhood, but not in the way they'd hoped. I heard that my mom cried a lot during those days. She didn't dare leave the house because she feared judgmental looks. Every time she opened the door, she saw cold stares from neighbors. Some people even pointed and whispered when she walked by. My dad was angry, but he didn't know what to do. He was respected in the community and was a member of many clubs and groups. Now he was kicked out of all of them. He used to be proud of his social status, and now that status had collapsed entirely. My parents' lives changed rapidly after just one night. From respected community members, they became shunned and despised. They had sown the wind, and now they were reaping the whirlwind. And then, 20 days after receiving my notice, my account received $25,000. They'd paid back the money I'd lent them. They didn't want another lawsuit or another scandal. They were already exhausted from what was happening. Additionally, I also received notice from my parents' lawyer. They had officially disowned me and crossed my name out of their will. The letter was written in dry legal language, but the message was apparent. I was no longer their son. I wasn't sad about that. I'd lost them long ago, from the day they cursed my son. After my mom and dad paid back the money, I discussed moving with my wife. Serena agreed immediately. As soon as they knew our intentions, my in-laws suggested we move to live near them in Portland. They had a rental house that had just finished its lease and were looking for new tenants. If we moved there, they agreed to let us live in that house rent-free. Tears suddenly flowed from my eyes after hearing their offer. They were just my in-laws, not blood relatives, but they loved me like their own son. Right after that, we put our current house up for sale, and 2 months later, we started our new life in Portland. The day we moved into the new house, Julia had prepared a lavish dinner. Edwin helped me carry things into the house. Henry, now almost 3 months old, lay in his crib watching everyone bustle around with wide eyes. He'd started to smile, and every time Julia leaned down, making funny faces, he'd laugh out loud. That evening, when the whole family sat gathered around the dinner table, I looked around and felt a peace I'd never had in years. This was my family. This was my home, not where I was born, but where I was loved. 3 years have passed since that heartbreaking incident. My family lives surrounded by my in-laws' love. Henry is now 3 years old. He's healthy, happy, and very talkative. My son chatters all day long, asking all kinds of questions that sometimes I don't know how to answer. Every time he sees my in-laws, Henry runs over, hugs them tight, and won't let go. Edwin often lifts Henry onto his shoulders and takes him for walks around the garden, showing him different vegetables and flowers. And his biological grandparents? Henry doesn't know who they are. To him, they don't exist. I've never told him about them, and maybe I never will. There are things children don't need to know. We have no relationship with my family anymore. No one knows where we are. I only stay in touch with a few relatives through social media. Sometimes I talk to them, but I don't tell them where we're living. A month ago, Uncle Thomas, my dad's younger brother, contacted me. He called me through a social media app one evening, his voice sounding worried and tired. He told me that over the past 3 years, my mom and dad had believed Matthew mortgaged their house and given him all the money to invest in some business project, and they'd lost all that money. I wasn't surprised. Matthew had always been someone who knew how to take advantage of others' trust, especially our parents. He always had grand plans, promising projects, but they never succeeded. And every time he failed, he'd blame someone else. Matthew then refused to take responsibility for the money they'd invested. He disappeared, and no one could contact him. His wife divorced him. The result was that my parents had to sell their house at a low price before the bank foreclosed. After paying off all the bank debt, they had $50,000 left and had to live in a cramped rental house for $1,000 a month on their meager pension income. After hearing this, I felt no sympathy at all. Before ending the call, Uncle Thomas said to me, "Roman, I advise you to forgive them and give them a chance. They're your parents, after all. They're old now, you can't let them live their final years in misery like this." Hearing his advice, I replied, "No, I won't do that. They cursed my son when he was only 3 days old. They called me a failure. They looked down on my wife for years. They disowned me and crossed my name out of their will. I have no obligation to help them." Uncle Thomas sighed and said disappointedly, "You're too cruel. You'll regret this later." I immediately replied, my voice cold as ice, "This will be the last time I talk to you." After that statement, I hung up. What do you think? Am I as cruel as Uncle Thomas said? Please feel free to leave your opinion in the comments below the story. Through this story, I have 5 pieces of advice for you. First advice: learn to set clear boundaries with toxic people. If someone continuously hurts you, you have the right to walk away from them, whether they're parents, siblings, or anyone else. Second advice: protect your nuclear family at all costs. When you get married and have children, your new family becomes your top responsibility. Third advice: cherish those who genuinely love you. Sometimes, real family isn't those who share your blood, but those who stand by you during your most challenging times. Fourth advice: don't be afraid to cut ties with toxic people. That doesn't mean you're ungrateful or cruel. It's about protecting yourself and those you love. You don't owe anyone loyalty if they don't respect you. Finally, please remember that every action has consequences. If you sow the wind, you'll reap the whirlwind. If you mistreat others, don't be surprised when they leave you. Life is a circle, and what you do today will come back to you tomorrow. Thank you for listening to my story. If this story touched your emotions, don't forget to subscribe to support me in future stories. Goodbye for now, and see you again. What would you do if your parents dumped your 80-year-old grandma in front of your house at 4 a.m. like trash? I've been through that situation. I used to believe my parents were people with conscience and compassion. But I was wrong. When I brought grandma back to my parents' house and confronted them, the reason behind their cruel actions really made me angry. And then, when I was trying to find a way to protect her, to get justice for grandma, my 80-year-old grandmother's unexpected action turned everything around and made my parents regret it. This is a story that proves the saying, karma will come to anyone who acts against their conscience. Before getting into the story details, thank you for choosing my story today. Wishing you a peaceful day. Give me a like if you want to wish me the same. Hello everyone. I'm Derek, 32 years old, living in Louisville, Kentucky. I work as a project manager for a real estate company here. Currently, I live with my 82-year-old grandma. We moved here over 2 years ago, and we're still in the process of starting our lives over. Before this, we lived in Chicago. My grandma and I used to have happy, fun weekends, grilling together in the backyard, eating dinner together at the old oak table, camping together with my parents and my sister Kendra. I used to think I was lucky to have a family like that. My grandma was also very proud of that happy extended family. She often told me that family was the most precious thing she had, more valuable than the house in Lincoln Park or any savings account. But then, all of our illusions were shattered entirely on a winter day 2 years ago. That was a day I believe Grandma, and I will never forget. The day I realized that sometimes, the people closest to you can become the most distant strangers, and blood relations don't guarantee anything at all. The story I'm sharing today took place on a weekday in December 2023, just a week before Christmas. That day, around 6 a.m., while I was still deeply asleep, my phone rang loudly. With my eyes still closed, I fumbled for my phone on the nightstand. As soon as I answered, without waiting for me to say hello, the person on the other end said, "Derek, who's that in front of your house? I've seen someone sitting on your porch for over half an hour." Even though I was drowsy, I immediately recognized Thomas's voice, my 55-year-old neighbor, who lives right next door. He's an early riser who goes jogging, and sometimes we wave to each other over the fence. With my voice still hoarse from just waking up, I replied, "You're not kidding, Thomas. Who would come to my house this early in the morning?" Thomas quickly answered, his voice a bit worried. "I've been up since 5:30. I already saw someone sitting on your porch then. Get up and check it out." After Thomas said that, I became much more alert. A vague feeling of unease began to spread in my chest. I quickly thanked him and ended the call. Right after that, I opened the security camera app on my phone. The image from the front porch camera appeared, and what unfolded before my eyes left me stunned. My heart seemed to stop beating in that moment. Without needing to zoom in closely, I immediately recognized who was sitting on my front porch. Without hesitating another second, I quickly jumped out of bed and ran downstairs to open the door. Each step felt heavy, and my heart was beating irregularly in my chest. When the door opened, what I saw left me speechless. The person sitting huddled on my front porch was my grandma, Carolyn. She was 80 years old that year. She sat alone on the freezing porch, wearing only a thin coat. Her shoulders shook in waves from the bone-cutting cold of December. Her wrinkled hands were raised to her mouth, and she was using her body's weak warmth to blow into her palms, trying to find some warmth in the freezing morning. The moment the door opened, and she saw me appear, Grandma slowly turned to look at me. Her eyes were full of exhaustion and red-rimmed. Her eyes were swollen, and I knew right away that she'd been crying a lot. A few seconds later, Grandma asked me shakily, "Derek, are you up?" Hearing her weak and hoarse voice, my heart felt like someone was choking it. Without answering that question, I quickly stepped over to Grandma and took her arm. The cold from her skin transferred over, making me shiver. Her arm was ice cold, and I realized Grandma had been on my front porch for a very long time. Immediately, I gently helped Grandma stand up and said to her, "Come inside with me." After I said that, Grandma just nodded weakly. I quickly helped her into the house. After Grandma sat down on the sofa, I quickly adjusted the heater temperature and then ran to get the thickest wool blanket in the house to wrap around her. Grandma sat there, still shaking, her lips pale. At this point, Grandma softly said to me, "Derek, it's still early morning, and I'm already bothering you." As soon as Grandma finished speaking, I looked at her, trying to keep my voice calm. "We'll talk later. I'm gonna make you a hot cup of milk." Right after that, I went down to the kitchen and started making milk. During that whole time, unanswered questions kept swirling in my head like a tornado. I wondered what time Grandma had arrived at my house. Why didn't she ring the doorbell? Why did she appear here alone in the middle of the night? Where were my parents? What had happened? My hands were shaking as I held the milk cup, and I had to stop for a few seconds to breathe deeply. At that moment, I had no idea that in just a few more minutes, I would be shocked by what Grandma would tell me. 10 minutes later, I returned to the living room with the hot milk. After taking a few sips of milk, her complexion gradually became a bit rosier. But she still sat in deep thought, her eyes staring distantly into the space in front of her. I knew she was thinking about something very heavy. I gently asked, "Grandma, what time did you get to my house? Why didn't you ring the doorbell so I could open the door?" Grandma turned to look at me with loving eyes, then slowly replied, "I was afraid the doorbell would wake you up, so I waited. You work hard all day. You need your rest." What Grandma said made my eyes sting with tears. That's how Grandma Carolyn was, always thinking of others before herself. Even in such a miserable situation, she was still worried about my sleep. A few seconds later, I took a deep breath and asked, "Why did you come here? Where are my parents?" Right after I asked this question, Grandma fell silent. Then I saw tears streaming down, rolling down her wrinkled cheeks. It took almost a minute before Grandma slowly replied, "Don't mention them anymore. They drove me to your house at 4 a.m. and dumped me there." As soon as Grandma finished speaking, I couldn't believe my ears. I asked again, "What? 4 a.m.? And you've been sitting in front of my house for 2 whole hours in below freezing weather like this?" Grandma didn't answer my question with words. She just nodded slightly to confirm, and more tears continued to fall. At this point, I couldn't hold back anymore. I shouted, "Oh my God, what the hell is this?" I jumped up, my mind spinning with thousands of questions and anger boiling in my bloodstream. A few minutes later, she started telling me everything, and every word she said was like a knife cutting into my heart. Around 3 a.m. that day, my dad woke Grandma up and told her to get in the car. She didn't understand what my parents were planning to do in the middle of the night, but because she trusted her son, she agreed to get in the car without asking many questions. At 4 a.m., the car stopped in front of my house, and then they pulled Grandma out of the car, left her sitting on the porch, and then drove away without a word of explanation. They told her to sit there and wait for me to open the door, like she was an old piece of furniture they didn't need anymore. Hearing Grandma tell this story, I was so shocked I couldn't speak. I couldn't believe that my parents could treat the very person who gave birth to them, who raised them, so cruelly. In my head at that moment, there was only one question. Why? What had made them lose all their humanity like this? After what Grandma told me, I sat in silence and thought. A few minutes later, trying to contain the anger boiling inside me, I turned to ask Grandma, "Grandma, why did my parents do that? Were they mad at you about something?" Grandma thought for a while, then slowly replied, "I guess it's probably about me refusing to sell the house in Lincoln Park. 2 weeks ago, he asked me to sell that house and give him $500,000 to pay off debts, but I refused." As soon as Grandma mentioned Lincoln Park, I immediately remembered that it was the house where my grandparents had lived together before. The 2-story home with the red brick front was where I had so many childhood memories. That house wasn't just property. It was a lifetime of memories for my grandparents. In 2010, after Grandpa died from heart disease, Grandma moved in with my parents. They had actively welcomed her home and told everyone they wanted to take care of her, because that was a child's responsibility. But I knew that was just an excuse. Every month, Grandma gave her entire pension of almost $4,000 to my parents, supposedly for them to handle household expenses. Over the past 10 years, that's nearly $500,000 that has flowed into their pockets. After Grandma's answer, I felt uncontrollable anger inside. Abandoning an 80-year-old in the middle of a freezing winter night was unacceptable, regardless of any reason. Trying to control my anger that wanted to explode, I took Grandma's hand and said, "Grandma, get some rest. At 9 a.m., I'll drive you back to my parents' house to clear this up." Grandma shook her head, her voice pleading as she said to me, "No need, Derek. Can I stay with you? I'll give you all my pension." Hearing Grandma's request, my heart ached. She was 80 years old and still thought she had to pay money to have someone take care of her. I smiled, trying to hide the heartbreak inside, then said to her, "You can stay with me. You don't need to give me money. I can handle it. But I need to find out why they treated you that way. And if necessary, I'll call the police." Hearing what I said, Grandma nodded and smiled, a weak smile but full of gratitude, and I stepped out onto the porch with my phone, trying to breathe the cold morning air to find some calm. At the same time, I opened the camera app and cut the video footage from 4 a.m. in front of the porch. In the video, I clearly saw my parents' car stop, saw them open the car door, and practically push Grandma out, then drive away without looking back. Grandma sat there, alone, in the darkness and cold. I knew this video would be undeniable evidence. Initially, I planned to take Grandma back to my parents' house at 9 a.m., but she was so exhausted that she fell asleep on the sofa. I couldn't bear to wake her, so I decided to let her rest more. At 2 p.m., we finally left the house to go to my parents'. Going with Grandma and me was Uncle David, my dad's younger brother. He lives about 400 miles south of us. That morning, after extracting the video footage from the camera, I sent it to Uncle David. His reaction didn't surprise me. He called back immediately, his voice shaking with anger, and said he'd drive over right away. Uncle David was naturally hot-tempered, and I knew he loved Grandma just as much as I did. Around 3 p.m., we arrived at my parents' house. After a few rings, they came to open the door. My parents stood there, and behind them was my sister Kendra. She seemed to have just arrived. When they saw Grandma standing next to me and Uncle David, my dad's face briefly turned a shade of red. But he quickly regained his composure, even crossing his arms in front of his chest with a defiant attitude. Uncle David was the first to react. As soon as he saw my dad, he charged forward like a bull seeing red. He was about to raise his hand, but Grandma quickly grabbed his arm. Her voice was stern. "David, stop." Uncle David stopped, but his eyes still glared red at my dad. What made me even angrier was that my parents didn't invite Grandma into the house at all. They just stood, blocking the door, as if we were unwelcome strangers. The argument erupted right there on the front porch. I stepped forward, looked straight into my dad's eyes, and confronted him. "Why were you cruel enough to dump Grandma at 4 a.m.? Do you know that's elder abuse? You could be prosecuted for this." My dad shot back, his voice cold as ice. "You want to take care of that old woman, go ahead. I'm not involved. Hearing that, I felt like someone had just slapped me in the face. Grandma then stepped forward, standing face to face with my dad. Her voice trembled as she asked, "Why are you treating me like this?" My dad took a deep breath, then roared, "You're still asking why? You favor David. You favor Derek. But Kendra and you treat us like trash." His face was red with anger, and I saw the veins on his neck bulging. This was the first time I'd seen Dad express such resentment. Grandma remained calm, though I knew she was hurting inside. She replied, her voice firm, "I've always been fair to everyone." My dad laughed bitterly, his voice full of sarcasm as he shouted, "Fair? You gave Derek money to buy a new car when he graduated from college. You gave David $300,000 to buy a house. But me, when I asked you to sell the house and give me $500,000, what did you do? You refused. When Kendra asked for $20,000 to buy a new car, what did you do? You refused that too." What my dad said shocked me, not because of the numbers, but because of the jealousy and calculation behind every word. That's when I realized the true face of my parents, of Kendra. They had been silently envious and comparing for years, counting every dollar others received from Grandma, and nurturing resentment in their hearts. A few seconds after Dad's words, I stepped forward, standing between him and Grandma. I looked straight into his eyes and asked, "So just because of money issues, you're willing to abandon your own mother?" My dad didn't avoid my gaze at all. He coldly replied, "The issue isn't money. The issue is fairness. She hasn't been fair to me." Every word Dad said was like cold water thrown in my grandma's face. I turned to look at her and saw her standing there, her aged eyes staring at the son she had given birth to, raised with her whole life. Then her tears fell, not sobbing, but silent tears rolling down her wrinkled cheeks. Her shoulders shook, and I knew her heart was breaking into pieces. Maybe the saddest thing in the 80 years Grandma had lived wasn't losing her beloved husband, wasn't old age and weakness, but being abandoned and accused of favoritism by the very son she had carried and given birth to. Seeing Grandma cry, my parents' and Kendra's faces remained cold as stone. Not a bit of emotion, not a hint of regret. They stood there defiantly, as if they were the victims in this story. Uncle David stood beside her, gently placing both hands on Grandma's shoulders to comfort her. I saw his jaw clench tight, and I knew he was trying to contain his anger with all his strength. As for me, I had made up my mind. I would report this incident to APS, Adult Protective Services. I would never forgive my parents for this action. After witnessing enough cruelty, I turned to take Grandma's hand, my voice gentle but firm. "Let's go, Grandma." But Grandma stood still, her eyes not leaving my dad. She gently wiped away the tears still on her cheeks, then suddenly said to Uncle David and me, "Wait, let me teach my son a lesson first." Uncle David and I both looked at her in amazement. The 80-year-old woman who had just cried from being abandoned by her own son now stood straight with a dignity I'd never seen before. Right after that, Grandma stepped forward, looked straight into my dad's eyes, and asked, "Robert, you say I play favorites, right? Well then, I'll tell you exactly how I've played favorites." After Grandma's words, my dad smirked sarcastically, as if waiting to see what she could say. Seeing that smile, I had to restrain myself significantly from rushing over and punching him in the face. If he weren't my father, I wouldn't have held back. Grandma took a deep breath, then slowly asked, "Robert, do you remember how much money you've taken from me? In 1995, when you bought this house, your father and I gave you $150,000 so that you wouldn't have to take out a bank loan. Do you remember?" My dad didn't answer, but I saw his jaw twitch slightly. A few seconds later, Grandma continued, not giving him a chance to interrupt. She said, "In 2000, when you wanted to buy that plot of land in the suburbs as an investment, you borrowed $100,000 from me. I lent it to you without asking a single question. After you sold it, you made $300,000 profit, but you never paid back that $100,000. You remember, don't you?" At this point, the sarcastic smile on my dad's lips had disappeared. He stood there, stammering, I don't remember that. You're making it up." Not giving my dad a chance to justify himself, Grandma continued, "In 2003, you lost $50,000 gambling. Who paid for that? Me. In 2009, You needed to renovate the house, so I lent you $120,000. You still haven't paid me back a penny. Since 2010, I've been living with you. Every month. Where does my nearly $4,000 pension go? Do you think an older woman like me spends $4,000 every month? Over 10 years, almost $500,000. Add up everything I've given, everything I've lent and never got back, you calculate how much that is. At this point, my dad was utterly silent. His face had gone pale, and I saw him swallow hard. My mom, standing behind him, didn't dare open her mouth either. Suddenly, my sister Kendra stepped forward. She shouted at Grandma, her voice shrill. You gave that money voluntarily. Nobody forced you. As soon as Kendra finished speaking, Grandma slowly turned to look at her. Then she pointed straight at Kendra's face and yelled loudly, "Shut up! It's not your turn to speak." Both Kendra and I jumped. This was the first time I'd heard Grandma yell like that. Kendra pressed her lips together, her face bright red. Clearly, she was angry, but she didn't dare fight back anymore. Uncle David, standing next to Grandma, suddenly burst out laughing sarcastically. He looked at my dad and said, his voice full of contempt, Well, Robert, I had no idea you were taking all of Mom's pension. How disgusting. All this time, Mom told me you were taking care of her, supporting her. Turns out she was the one supporting you." My dad now looked at Uncle David like an enemy. He growled, "Watch it or I'll put you in the hospital, David." Uncle David showed no fear. He stepped forward, standing right in front of my dad. He said challengingly, "Come on then, put me in the hospital." My dad's hands clenched into fists. I saw his hands shaking with anger, but he didn't dare act. At this point, Grandma pulled Uncle David back and said, "David, I'm not finished talking yet." Uncle David obediently stepped back, but his eyes never left my dad. A few seconds later, Grandma turned to look at Kendra. Her voice calmer, she said, "And you, Kendra, who paid for your college tuition? 4 years of college, tuition and living expenses, almost $80,000. Who paid? Paid. Remember that." Kendra opened her mouth to say something, but Grandma didn't give her the chance. Grandma continued, "Derek took out student loans himself, worked late nights to handle everything himself. He didn't ask me for a penny. After he graduated, I felt sorry for him, saw how hard he was working, so I gave him money for a car. You received many times more than he did, and you still have the nerve to compare." I stood there, listening to Grandma speak, and my throat choked up. I didn't know she had been watching my life so closely, had felt so sorry for me. Kendra now stubbornly replied, her voice still defiant, "That's because Derek chose to handle it himself. If he had asked you, you definitely would have given him more than me." After Kendra's response, Grandma sighed. A heavy, tired sigh. Maybe she was exhausted with what they'd done, with the ingratitude and jealousy that had eaten into their very bones. Not wanting to waste more words on these unworthy people, Grandma said firmly, each word like a sentence, "I'm going to make you all regret this." After saying that, she turned around and walked straight to the car, her steps slow but determined. I quickly followed behind Grandma. As we were almost at the car, a sudden commotion arose behind us. I turned around and saw my dad collapsed on the porch, hands covering his face. My mom screamed, her voice piercing, "Call 911. Someone call 911. Kendra pushed Uncle David away, her face twisted with anger as she yelled, "How dare you hit my father? If you're so tough, hit me too." As soon as Kendra finished speaking, Uncle David's hand swung up and left 5 bright red finger marks on Kendra's cheek. Kendra covered her face and sobbed, while Uncle David stood there, saying firmly, "That slap was me punishing you on behalf of Grandma. You brat." Both Grandma and I were stunned by Uncle David's actions. I hadn't expected him to lose control like that, though in my heart, I had to admit that part of me felt Kendra deserved that slap. After leaving my parents' house, when we were sitting in the car, Grandma turned to Uncle David and said sternly, "David, I told you no violence." Uncle David scratched his head, looking like a child being scolded by his mother. He replied, "Sorry, Mom, but they were so arrogant. Couldn't take it." Grandma just sighed softly, saying nothing more. As for me, though I hate violence, in this situation I secretly supported Uncle David. Sometimes, some people only understand the language of force. During the entire drive from my parents' house back to mine, I thought everything was over. I thought Grandma had said everything that needed to be said, and now we would start a new life, away from those toxic people. But I was wrong. What Grandma did 3 days later made my parents and Kendra truly panic. And I realized that my 80-year-old grandma still had cards up her sleeve that no one expected. 3 days after the confrontation, Grandma suddenly asked both Uncle David and me to accompany her to the lawyer's office. She didn't explain much, just saying there was important business to attend to. At 9 a.m., we arrived. When I walked in, I was surprised to see my parents were already there. They sat on one side of the table, their faces full of confusion and worry. Clearly, they didn't understand why Grandma had invited them there either. After everyone was present, the lawyer began speaking. He announced that, at Mrs. Carolyn's request, he would proceed with revoking my parents' and Kendra's inheritance rights. Hearing this, my dad was like he'd been struck by lightning. He jumped up from his chair, his voice panicked as he asked the lawyer, "My mother made a will? When?" The lawyer calmly replied, "The will was made in 2015. According to the original will, after Mrs. Carolyn passes away, her house in Lincoln Park, along with $300,000 in savings, would be designated to you as the heir. Your daughter and son, Kendra and Derek, would each get $50,000. David receives $1 million, as he doesn't receive a share of the house like you. David's children also get $50,000 each." I sat there, stunned by the numbers I just heard. I had no idea Grandma had so much wealth, and even less idea that she'd planned the distribution over a decade ago. At this point, my parents and Kendra's faces went pale. They turned to look at Grandma, and my dad stammered, "Mom, why did you make a will without telling me?" Grandma replied, her voice hard as steel, "If I had told you, how would I have witnessed you throwing your mother away like trash?" That statement was like a bucket of cold water thrown right in my dad's face. He stood there, mouth open but unable to speak. Then something I never expected happened. My dad suddenly dropped to his knees. He grabbed Grandma's legs, his voice pleading, "Mom, I'm sorry. I was wrong. Please forgive me." Kendra and my mom also quickly knelt, creating a pathetic scene right in the middle of the elegant lawyer's office. They cried and begged like people who had just lost their most precious possession. Watching that scene, Uncle David smiled sarcastically. He said to them, "Where was all that attitude 3 days ago? Cowards." They turned to look at Uncle David, eyes full of resentment, but no one dared open their mouth to object. Money had silenced them more effectively than anything else. Grandma wasn't moved at all by their crying and begging. She just let them kneel there, as if they were strangers she didn't know. Then she turned to the lawyer and said, "Announce the new information." The lawyer nodded, then looked at my parents who were kneeling on the ground. He said, "Mrs. Carolyn has made the following changes. The house in Lincoln Park will be transferred to Derek's name this month. The $350,000 that you were to receive under the old will also be transferred to Derek's account in the next few days. The money David and his family were to receive will also be transferred immediately, without having to wait until Mrs. Carolyn passes away." After the lawyer finished announcing, the room fell silent. My parents and Kendra went pale. They continued begging Grandma. Despite my parents and Kendra kneeling and grabbing Grandma's legs, she pushed them away decisively. Then she stood up and asked Uncle David and me to take her home. As we walked out of the office, I could still hear Kendra's crying echoing behind us. But I didn't look back. Some things, once broken, can never be repaired. Exactly 1 month later, all transfer procedures were complete. The house in Lincoln Park was now in my name, and the money in my account had increased significantly. But to me, that wasn't as important as Grandma being vindicated and justice being served. However, the story didn't end there. 2 months after my parents dumped Grandma, the criminal trial took place. I had filed a complaint with APS right after the incident, and they had conducted an investigation. The video footage from my security camera became the most critical evidence. After reviewing all the evidence and testimony, the judge handed down the verdict. My parents were sentenced to 5 years probation for elder abuse. Along with that was a fine of $120,000, which included emotional damages to the grandmother and medical costs. After that incident, Grandma suffered from severe insomnia and had to undergo psychological treatment for months. Uncle David also had to face consequences for his actions. He was fined $4,000 for violent behavior, along with 3 months of anger management classes. When he heard the verdict, he just shrugged and told me, even if they gave me jail time, I still would have punched my brother. Grandma also requested a restraining order against my parents and Kendra. Leaving the court that day, I felt a little sad. After all, they were still my parents, my sister. But at the same time, I also felt relieved that justice had been served. Grandma had been protected, and those who had oppressed her had to pay for their actions. After that trial, Grandma suggested moving to another state to live. She said she wanted to start over in a place without painful memories haunting her. I immediately agreed to that request. I sold both houses, including the one I was living in and the Lincoln Park house that Grandma had given me. And exactly 40 days after the trial, Grandma and I moved to Louisville, Kentucky. No one in the family knew where we were. Only Uncle David knew our new address, and he often visited Grandma whenever he had the chance. More than 2 years have passed since that day. My grandma is now 82, but still healthy and sharp. She constantly pushes me to get married. I laugh and tell her there's plenty of time. As for my parents and Kendra, they had to sell their house and move to a different area. Residents in the region severely condemned their actions. Some people even threw tomatoes and eggs at my parents when they returned from court that day. Over the past 2 years, I haven't contacted them. Many times I've heard from relatives that they're looking for us. They say they regret it and want to make things right. They want to meet Grandma to apologize. A few relatives have advised Grandma and me to give them a chance to correct their mistakes. They say forgiveness will help everyone be free. What do you think about this advice to forgive? Should Grandma and I give them a chance? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Through this story, there are a few pieces of advice I want to share with everyone. First, never underestimate older adults. My 82-year-old grandma had a plan from years ago to protect herself and those who deserved it. Wisdom comes from experience, and sometimes older people see through everything more than we think. Second, greed and jealousy can destroy any relationship, even the most sacred family bonds. My parents let greed cloud their judgment, and the price they paid was losing everything. Third, always keep evidence. The video from my security camera became the most crucial evidence in the case. Without it, they would have denied all guilt. Fourth, don't be afraid to stand up and protect your loved ones, no matter who's causing the harm. Blood relations aren't an excuse for anyone to have the right to abuse you. Fifth, never use violence as my Uncle David did. Let the law protect you. My story ends here. Thank you, everyone, for listening to my story. If this story touched your emotions, don't forget to subscribe to support us in future stories.